This is a presentation for BX3082 International Marketing. The presentation is on a proposal for Q Clothing Company to penetrate the Chinese market. The purpose of the presentation is to analyse the political and legal considerations in proposing a plan for Q Clothing Company to penetrate the Chinese market. The close proximity to China and the high-quality Q product provide a competitive advantage for the brand. China offers a vast market with a population of over 1.3 billion and an emerging middle class that is expected to grow to 380 million over the next 15 years. With continued growth, there is an expected increase of disposable income amongst them. So to introduce the topic, Zhang reports that China and Australia's bilateral relationship is the strongest it has been. China is Australia's largest two-way trading partner in goods and services and its largest goods export destination. Further, in 2015, 1 million Chinese people travelled to Australia. This created a valuable inbound tourist market, and they spent over 7.5 billion Australian dollars, which is more than the amount spent by Britons, Americans and Canadians. This exposure of Chinese consumers to Australian brands can be developed by Q in the penetration of the Chinese market. Chincotta states that political and legal factors play a critical role in international marketing activities, which is why we will focus on them first. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the brand. Q is an Australian-owned brand. It was established in 1968. It is somewhat unique in that it is predominantly Australian-made, with the exception of some of their diffusion lines, such as Q in the City, Q Knit, the shirts, and the letter Q, but it is wholly Australian-owned. Q uses the above as a point of difference to gain competitive advantage in Australia from other Australian fashion brands, and as well as that they promote their ethical clothing accreditation and association with the Textile, Clothing and Footwear Union of Australia. The Q style can be described as innovative corporate fashion, and it is targeted at the middle class budget, and that's done by bridging the gap between designer and retail fashion. First of all, we'll look at some political considerations. So Katabi states that a government affects almost every aspect of business life in a country. And that's particularly the case for a country such as the People's Republic of China, which is led by the Chinese Communist Party, and a very regulated country, which is dominated by this one party. Katabi defined China's political structure as a multi-party system with more than one party present, and they continue to define the multi-party system as a system in which there is no clear majority, with governments formed through coalitions of several parties. The Australian government entered into a free trade agreement with China, which is referred to as Chapter, and that came into force on the 20th of December 2015. DFAT states that the agreement unlocks significant opportunities for Australia in China. Chapter facilitates trade through transparency and regulation of customs procedures, which were previously quite complicated, the addressing of tariffs, the simplification of other red tape obstacles to trade in relation to trading in goods specifically in this case. So essentially, the Chapter agreement allows for the import and export of goods, such as clothing, into China. Lowering of tariffs and facilitation of importing will allow Q to be competitive in what is a saturated market over there in terms of clothing production generally. It's Q's strong brand that will be their point of difference. I'm going to talk to you about some legal considerations as well. Katabi defines international law as a body of rules that is voluntarily binding on states and international persons in their relations with one another. So what that means is to be voluntarily binding means there's no body that is there to enforce the law, such as in Australia, if there was an intellectual property dispute, it would go through the court system, perhaps starting at a district court level, and up to appeals it could go to the High Court. So it refers to things such as customs treaties and international court decisions. China has what is referred to as a socialist law system. And that means that the legal system is characterised by state ownership of the means of production and aspects of competitive decisions. And to an extent, aside from the state ownership aspect, that's the case with all legal systems. However, in a socialist context, it is of a particularly pervasive influence on trade. The Australian system, on the other hand, has both common law and codified elements, and what that means is some of our law comes from previous court decisions and some of it is codified in terms of statute or codes or legislation. Laws that can have an indirect influence on marketing transactions internationally include factors such as minimum wage legislation, which is particularly relevant to a clothing context in China, and particularly important to this particular proposal. And that's because China's share of global fashion manufacturing is at 43% by value, and it produces 8 times more clothing than its nearest rival, which is Italy. To succeed, Q Clothing must identify that any successful penetration will not be through price point competitiveness, particularly as manufacturing in Australia is far more. Rather, it can be achieved by adhering to those core values and targeting the middle class through innovative corporate fashion. And those core values were things that I talked about in the introduction, such as their strong ethical grounding. Further, legal considerations are the lack of intellectual property safeguards in China. Now, counterfeiting could prove particularly destructive for Q, as an inferior product would damage their credibility and the reputation of the company and effectively destroy the blocks upon which competitive advantage may be built. So, whilst such violations may occur anywhere in the world, it is a particularly relevant issue in China. Product quality would be a significant factor in market strategy, and thus product superiority and ethical production are important aspects that will require protection. Q would need to register trademarks and copyright. However, the problem is that registration would grant certain rights in Australia but still might not provide adequate protection in terms of a Chinese legal context. Q may need to look to treaty protection and other international agreements under the World Intellectual Property Organization. This includes the Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works, and the Universal Copyright Convention. Another consideration is the enforcement of those rights and taking action against counterfeits, which can prove a costly legal exercise. So to conclude, the political and legal considerations in both the home country and the host country are important to the international marketer. Compliance with laws is mandatory in order to successfully do business abroad. Laws will regulate the international behaviour of firms, and the international marketer must anticipate changes in both the political and legal environments and develop strategies to address them. Lastly, I have some references of where the information for the presentation has been sourced. Thank you.